Thank you, and good morning, all of you. Thank you all for being here and for your support of IWCA. This is our largest fundraising event, and so we really appreciate you being here and supporting the organization. And also without all of your support and our sponsors' support, this would not be possible. So as you are getting your meals and getting started, I want to just give a few updates on IWCA. We right now have our global chapter network. We have 31 chapters currently. And we just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, signed our MOU with Papua New Guinea, which is a newest chapter, the 31st chapter. And yes. Over the past few years, in addition to producing country chapters, we have expanded to consuming countries also. So we have currently 6 consuming country chapters. We have the United States, Australia, Japan, South Korea. We started end of last year, and then we have Germany and Italy. Italy and Papua New Guinea were the 2 chapters we signed up this year. And so that is, one of our biggest goals is to develop market access for our producing country chapter members, and having these consuming country chapters provides a great opportunity to connect the two sides of our supply chain. So, and in order to ensure that we are serving all our chapters and our members, the board and the staff of IWCA will be convening this fall to develop a strategic plan for the organization, which will provide a roadmap for growth for the organization over the next 5 years. So next year is our 20th anniversary. And yes, we just are excited to get to this new phase of our organization. So for the 20th anniversary, hopefully we'll have a larger breakfast, and we can showcase our future and what we are anticipating our future to be. And so we have and I also want to, this is an exciting phase for coffee. I want to take this opportunity to welcome Venusia Nogueira. She is the first woman to lead the International Coffee Organization. So, yes. And she has been a great supporter of IWCA and IWCA Brazil. And as the first woman, we are looking forward to working with her to ensure that women are supported through the entire coffee chain. And ICO has already developed a gender strategy through their Coffee Public-Private Task Force and the different work streams. And we'll be working closely with ICO to see how we can ensure that we are serving the needs of women. So today we have a very inspiring speaker, Sahra Nguyen. And a few months ago, when we started planning this last year, after breakfast last year, when we started planning this, Maria from our team came and told me, oh, we have to, Sahra Nguyen, she sent me a copy of Food and Wine magazine. She was featured in the Food and Wine magazine. And so Maria sent me information about her and said, we should probably ask her if she can be a keynote speaker. And then serendipitously, I was traveling from Cancun back to Colorado on United Airlines in November. And I'm looking at this Hemispheres magazine, and I opened the Hemispheres magazine, and there was an article about Sahra in the Hemispheres magazine. So immediately I contacted her and asked her if she would come, and her hometown is Boston. She lives in New York City, and so she was able to come here. So I'm going to read, she has for somebody as young as her, she has a pretty large resume, but I'm going to just read out some of the key points about her. So she is an award-winning filmmaker, entrepreneur, and founder and CEO of Nguyen Coffee Supply. On a mission to transform the coffee industry through diversity, inclusion, and sustainability, Nguyen Coffee Supply has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Vice, New York Magazine, New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, and honored with the 2019 Star Chef's Rising Star Award. And in July 2021, the Food and Wine featured Nguyen as on the cover of their Game Changers issue among 25 people and companies changing the way we eat and drink. This was the first time in 7 years Food and Wine has featured a person on the cover, and the first time in 40 years they've featured an entrepreneur. Her explosive brand and company mission has caught the attention of everyone from Mindy Kaling to Tory Burch, including drinking coffee with Drew Barrymore on her nationally televised show. And she graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, with a double major in Asian American Studies and World Arts and Cultures. Served as the director of the Writing Success Program at UCLA, has worked in nonprofit youth arts, grassroots organizing, and freelance journalism. In 2018, when Sahra launched Nguyen Coffee Supply, the first specialty Vietnamese coffee company importing directly from the source and roasting in Brooklyn, New York. Historically excluded from the specialty coffee industry, Vietnam is the second largest producer in the world. Sahra's mission is to diversify the coffee industry, increase the visibility of Vietnamese producers, and transform the landscape through sustainable coffee farming. She works directly with fourth-generation Vietnamese coffee farmers from the Da Lat in the Central Highlands, whose beans are certified clean and organic in Vietnam. As the daughter of Vietnamese refugees in Boston, Massachusetts, the company's name is a nod to her Vietnamese heritage, and I'm so pleased to say her parents are here today. I know it is a proud moment for her parents to be here with the daughter. So, you know, I was at RICO this week. I was part of a panel to discuss the future of wild coffee in the cup. And so the work Sahra is doing, so we had, as part of that panel, we had gotten, from my contacts in India, I was able to bring some Liberica coffee. We got Excelsa Liberica coffee from Uganda. We had Coffea Resemosa from a producer in South Africa. And we had Coffea eugenioides from a producer in Colombia. And so I think we really need to redefine what specialty is, because if we go through, Arabica coffee is very highly susceptible to climate change. And if we rely just on Arabica, I think we are shooting ourselves in the foot. So we really need to diversify and look, but then we can't have Robusta and all the Liberica or other coffees. We can't hold it to the standard of Arabica. We need to develop new standards. And I think the work that Sahra is doing is promoting that, redefining what specialty means. I think that is going to be the future. And I'm so pleased that Sahra is here to talk about her journey in coffee and with Robusta. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sahra. Can we get it one more time for Dr. Sahra? Deputy Director, thank you. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody feeling? We need more coffee. If you've had one cup of coffee already this morning, say woo! If you've had 2 cups, say woo! This is me on 0 cups, right? Imagine if I have a cup in. Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to be here speaking at the IWCA breakfast. Thank you so much for everyone being here and supporting IWCA and our mission worldwide. I'm going to share a little bit about my journey into the coffee industry, which has been quite unconventional. And so Sahra kindly gave a very, very kind introduction about me earlier. And so yes, so some of you may know me As the founder and CEO of Nguyen Coffee Supply, we are proudly America's first specialty coffee importer and roaster. Or maybe you know me as someone who is a fierce advocate for Vietnamese coffee and changing the narrative around Vietnamese coffee and what Vietnamese coffee can be, and or simply what good coffee can be in general. Some people know me as a fierce advocate and a champion of the resilient Robusta bean, with Vietnam being not just the world's second largest producer of coffee, but also the #1 producer of Robusta in the world. We are proud champions of the Robusta bean. And earlier this year, just last month, we launched an initiative called the Robusta Pledge, which I hope everyone in here will sign. And lastly, some of you may know me as the person throwing coffee beans on the cover of Food and Wine magazine, which was a very, very, incredible moment for not just me, but really the industry in general and the shift that we've been talking about and working towards for the last few years. So my journey into coffee has been quite unconventional. It really only started a few years ago when I launched the company in 2018. But we go further back into my journey. I'm going to share a little bit about my journey even further so we can understand how we got to where we are today. So even prior to starting the company, I worked full-time as a documentary filmmaker. I'm going to use this cool laser thing that David taught me. This is me! This is a crew photo where I developed and produced and directed documentary films for companies like NBC News, PBS, and my mission through film has always been to increase representation of the Asian American community, of marginalized communities, of immigrant communities. For me, I felt like growing up as a first-generation Vietnamese American, daughter of immigrants and refugees, in a pre-social media era. I was born in the 80s, grew up through the 80s and 90s. Pre-social media, there was such a huge lack of representation, and so that's what led me into my path in film. So my journey started right here in Boston, Massachusetts, as Sahra mentioned. Both of my parents who are joining us here today are from Vietnam. They are refugees from the war. They were part of a group of folks called Boat People, where after the war they escaped the country on a boat, eventually made their way into a refugee camp in Hong Kong, and then ended up in Boston, Massachusetts, where I was born and raised. So, as I mentioned, growing up in the 90s, we didn't have Instagram or YouTube or Facebook. As a young person, one of the most defining experiences for me was feeling really underrepresented, invisible, and just misunderstood. As a Vietnamese American, I felt like, this is me, this is not a sibling, this is actually me. So imagine this version of me in the 90s, okay, in Boston, all right, in the public school system. It was very traumatizing for me. My mom had to give me the bowl haircut just to layer on the complications. So fortunately, a lot of my journey, of my struggle with feeling seen and understood, this all shifted when I went to high school. When I was a high school teenager, I was very fortunate enough to discover activism and youth organizing. I became involved with several social justice youth organizations in Boston, Massachusetts, where I was able to unpack a lot of things I was feeling around racism and systemic oppression. I was able to understand my parents' political and social history. I was able to understand the things that I was feeling as a marginalized and underrepresented person wasn't my fault, but really part of larger systems of inequity and injustice. And then from this moment in high school, it was really the beginning of my path towards building a world rooted in equity, representation, and justice. And as Sahra mentioned, I eventually went on to UCLA and I majored in Asian American Studies. So, can you guess which one I am here? I look very different. Okay, let's go A, B, and C. Say if you think this is me. Raise your hand. Okay, okay. How about this person? How about this person? Just kidding. How about this person? Or this is me. Little angry me. No political activist me. I was so angry. I had the best RBF, which is resting B face. So this is where my journey, and a lot of this will make sense, I think, when I explain my journey as a filmmaker and youth activist, and you hear about Nguyen Coffee Supply, it's really just an extension of my life's work. So in 2016, I was living in New York City as a full-time freelancer. And as a freelancer, I spent a lot of time in coffee shops. And I noticed something very interesting happening in 2016. It was, we're in the height of third wave, specialty coffee cafes, and I started seeing Vietnamese iced coffee pop up on a lot of menus. It reminded me of this cultural signal of when matcha first popped up on cafe menus. Remember that, right? When we were all like, what is this different green drink, right? And now matcha is an explosive mainstream category of its own CPG and cafe brick and mortar series. Same thing with chai. So it was signaling to me this cultural moment and this interest of an Asian-inspired beverage entering mainstream American culture. Very, very exciting. However, every time I would try and order the Vietnamese iced coffee off of these specialty coffee menus, it never tasted like Vietnamese iced coffee or even Vietnamese coffee beans because it wasn't. And I would ask the barista, what's in this drink? And they said, oh, it's our house Ethiopian or our house Colombian. We add sweet and condensed milk to it. So while I appreciate the attempt for cultural diversity on menus, this really wasn't the right way to do it. For so many reasons. One, we're rendering the actual producers invisible, right? Why can't we call it Ethiopian cold brew with sweet condensed milk? Well, what happened to our values of transparency and integrity there? So then this set me on a rabbit hole of, well, why don't they just use real Vietnamese coffee beans? So I went on a search across supermarkets in New York City. I went on a search online. I visited all the major coffee roasters' websites, and I was pretty shocked to discover that I couldn't find a single origin, fresh roasted Vietnamese coffee bean. And I kept asking why. And I said, maybe Vietnam doesn't grow coffee? And then in my research further, I was so incredibly blown away to discover that Vietnam is the world's second largest producer of coffee in the world. This was kind of like my early light bulb moment to Nguyen Coffee Supply. And I was like, whoa, how do I not know that, right? Like, I'm Vietnamese American, my parents are from Vietnam. Why don't I, including more people, know about Vietnam's contribution to the global coffee experience? And then I felt like this must be because of lack of transparency, lack of representation, lack of visibility. The same themes that I felt as a child, as a young person, and throughout my career as a filmmaker, fighting for representation through the screen. And so then I started thinking about this and I said, well, maybe I can bring Vietnamese coffee to the United States and increase the visibility here. So in 2016, I was working on a documentary for NBC News that took place in Cambodia. It was around the immigration laws around deportation of the Southeast Asian community. Right before my production schedule in Cambodia, I made a trip to Vietnam to visit my relatives. Most of my extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, all in Vietnam. So growing up, I was very fortunate enough to have a strong connection to Vietnam, and I was able to visit my relatives quite often. So in 2016, again, just like this early light bulb moment, I asked my relatives, does anybody know anyone who has a coffee farm here? I'm thinking about importing coffee beans. And my aunt was like, actually I do. So we took a plane from Hanoi, where my dad's side is from, down to Dalat. And this was the very beginning of my partnership with my current producing partner, Antien in the lab. And this was 2016, so from 2016, over the next few years, I was still working full-time as a freelance filmmaker, and I started learning everything I could about the coffee industry, about how coffee is grown, how it's sourced, how it's harvested, and then eventually how to import roast. And this photo here is a photo of me and my mom, who's sitting on the left, and then two of my producing partners, and this is a resting shack on the farm. It's where they go to kind of take a break from the sun. And through my time in Vietnam, I had a lot of conversations just trying to understand what the challenges were for Vietnamese farmers and Vietnamese producers, what their goals and dreams were. I would just ask them, what is your dream, you know? And some of the things I learned in my conversations was people in Vietnam, they would say to me, Cà phê Việt Nam có tiếng mà không có tiền. What that means in English is Vietnamese coffee has fame, but it has no fame. Because domestically, they feel so proud of this product that they produce. They feel so proud to be the world's second largest contributor of coffee. Yet they know that the rest of the world doesn't know this. And at the same time, I'm talking to them about how are they improving their crop and how they're growing. And you know, this is 2016, 2017. Everyone has the internet. Folks in Vietnam, they know how the specialty coffee industry, or really the coffee industry, is developing in general. And they're just like, how can we be a part of that, right? And the struggle that they found is that oftentimes, you know, they will invest extra time, extra labor, extra resources, extra energy, extra money to improve their crop and produce a better coffee bean. But at the end of the season, they have to sell it to the commodity market because buyers don't believe that Vietnamese coffee can be better. Buyers are boxing Vietnamese coffee into, no, Vietnamese coffee doesn't count and it's just not good. So they all end up in a cycle of producing lower grade quality, or more importantly, producing what the market demands. And then I asked them, well, what is your dream? And then my producing partner at the time was like, he's like, I think it would be so cool if my coffee beans could make it to America. And since then, we made that dream come true. So, further in my research, I'm learning about Vietnam's major contribution, right? At the same time, I was quite shocked to come across so much disdain for the Robusta bean on the internet, which I think everyone who is involved with coffee is familiar. And this perspective, this disdain for the Robusta bean, it's so well documented on the internet, there's no getting around it, right? Even headlines like this, like, the world is drinking more coffee, but it's the cheaper, nastier kind. Ooh, doesn't that so like gross and nastier, right? Yikes. How did an entire variety become categorized as nasty, right? Do we talk about any other agricultural crop in these dichotomies? Merlot is the nastier wine. Sauvignon Blanc is the best wine, right? We don't do that with any other variety. These narratives of superiority and inferiority, this hierarchical framework, they're pure social constructs. And just like what Sahra was saying earlier, it's not about holding Robusta to the standards of Arabica. And with our mission at Nguyen Coffee Supply, our mission is to not replace Arabica with Robusta. That's not it. It's not to replace instant coffee with specialty coffee. It's not to replace any type of coffee with any coffee because they cannot do each other's jobs. It's to just simply have an open and inclusive perspective of what can Arabica offer us? What can Robusta offer us? What is unique about Arabica? What is unique about Robusta, right? Because ultimately, the inclusivity around the variety is not about the bean, it's about the communities behind the beans. So when we perpetuate these harmful narratives of Arabica is superior, Robusta is inferior, what we end up doing is we box entire segments of the community into two different parts of the market. One segment is a box for, one segment of the market is about opportunity for growth in progress. If you're growing Arabica, you can be a part of the mission for growth and progress. If you're growing Robusta, you get boxed into just right here. And this is the construct that we at Nguyen Coffee Supply set out to deconstruct. So aside from, as somebody who grew up in activism, who generally is committed to equity and justice and representation and just fairness, I felt very, very offended by these narratives about Robusta. In addition to it being related to Vietnam, and in addition to Vietnam being the #1 producer of Robusta, I'm like, is there some level of xenophobia in here? Maybe some unintentional, discrimination because of the region? Questions to ask. So once I arrived at these learnings, I knew that this had to change. I knew that we had to deconstruct the ways we were talking about coffee and coffee communities in general. So I continued to set out to learn everything I could about coffee. This is one of the trips here. Fortunately, my parents were able to come on some of my earlier trips. My dad here, my mom back here. They're very supportive. I learned how to source. I learned how coffee is processed. Really being at origin, working in collaboration. I learned how to import. This is a photo of my very, very first palette in 2018. So cute, right? And even if you look at this, so when I first started learning how to roast, I roasted at a shared roast facility in Brooklyn. And everyone to this day still talks about this palette because they've never seen a palette that arrived caged up. Because our producers never shipped coffee beans to America before. He was like, I have to protect these beans, the beans are going to America. He was so excited. So this was about 6 bags, and he caged it up, and when it arrived at the warehouse in Brooklyn, no one understood why is this thing caged up, but these are the moments of learning that we go through together when we work in collaboration and partnership, right? And then eventually I told him, you don't need to build a wooden cage around it, you just wrap it in saran wrap, right? And so we worked with 6 pallets, and today we import by the container. So this is me, my very first container here. And in 2018, when I was first learning how to roast, I had to take a roasting class at this facility to be able to run the roasting machine. And everyone around me, while they were quite supportive, they were also like, wow, we've never had a Vietnamese coffee bean in this warehouse or this roastery. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then they're like, we've also never had a Robusta bean in this roastery. I'm like, oh, interesting, right? I'm like, why is that? And then one person was like, because Robusta coffee is gross. I'm like, oh, have you ever tried it? No. He's like, no, but I know it is, right? There's just, and I think a lot of people can relate to these narratives, right? It was just so fascinating to me, the fixation people had over these narratives and this idea of if I could perpetuate this narrative, then I know something about coffee, right? Yeah, no, I wasn't having that, so. We set out to change the narrative, so. This is where my background in film and storytelling really came through. I knew that the problem we were encountering at this juncture and moment in time is not supply, it's not the source. Robusta coffee, Vietnamese coffee, is already being grown. It's already the second largest source of coffee in the world. If we can simply make that product better, the impact it would have on such a big population of the coffee community. Right. So it wasn't about let's grow Vietnamese coffee. It was we need to change the social constructs and the ideologies and perspectives and the narratives around the coffee so that we can systemically shift the industry and then make the product better. So this is where my background in storytelling and film came in really handy. I just set out to change the narrative. And fortunately, people were willing to listen. since we launched in 2018, people really have been resonating with our mission. And it's not that they care so much about Vietnamese coffee. I feel that people generally resonate with these universally human values of fairness and representation and equity. And so since then, we've been really blessed to change the narrative on platforms like Good Morning America, Drew Barrymore Show, CBS News, Cheddar News. And every time we're able to get on these platforms, we're able to impact more people and change more perspectives. These are some of the early articles, and if you just kind of glance the headlines, you can see the headlines are not about, check out this new coffee bean. It's not. The mission is so much greater than that, right? It's about changing the trajectory of Vietnamese coffee, right? It's giving Vietnamese coffee its due in America. It's past time to respect the Vietnamese coffee bean. So happy for the bean. And even little moments, Mindy Kaling was seen on social media, and I love this video because she's shouting out our product. She goes, "I think I'm saying this right. Nguyen Coffee Supply." As somebody who grew up for pretty much most of my childhood, kind of not liking my last name, hate is a strong word, but the last name, the bowl haircut, the identity, they were all just factors of my difference. And growing up, roll call, first day in class, just cringing at what the teacher would say when she came across my name. And the reason why I named the company Nguyen Coffee Supply was because I, one, really wanted to put forth our mission of representation, and two, I wanted us all socially, collectively, to learn how to say it. So for Mindy Kaling to say, "I think I'm saying it right," Nguyen Coffee Supply, I'm like, yes, you are, right? So that in itself was just such a huge moment for our journey, for not just coffee, but representation. So we launched the company in 2018, and the biggest challenge and hurdle that I felt as an entrepreneur, it's not just selling a product, because it's not like I was selling soap or a product that people easily understood already. My challenge and our challenge ahead as a company, but really as an industry, is we need to shift the narrative in order for a company like Nguyen Coffee Supply to be able to be successful, right? Because we're still living in a time where Robusta is bad is a dominant narrative. It's not just about Nguyen Coffee Supply having a hard time, it's about Robusta farmers around the world in all countries having a hard time. So what's incredible is, early this year, the New York Times made a food prediction. How will Americans eat in 2022? The food forecasters speak. Where's my red dot? Robusta rising. Robusta rising. The New York Times says Robusta rising. And this was a part of a larger food trend report by the WGSN. And since the New York Times came out with this, or the WGSN came out with this, the New York Times came out with this, the Times Magazine came out with this, now the narrative is shifting where everyone is talking about this, right? Even Sprudge talks about this, and I love this paragraph here from Sprudge, because this is really a special moment for us collectively. And if I can take a moment to read this, I really respected Sprudge's perspective here. And it goes, "At the end of each passing year comes a chance to reflect, learn from our mistakes, and work toward the best version of ourselves. And with it also comes a new year and a new chance to speculate wildly about the upcoming year in hopes of garnering a few coveted clicks. The New York Times, the paper of record, opted to take part in this time-honored tradition with some hot takes on what the hot food trends in America will be in 2022. Among these is the claim that Robusta is poised to challenge Arabica's dominance in American coffee culture." Now, what stands out to me is not the dominance piece, that was a bit clickbaity, but it's about this part right here. A chance to reflect. and a chance for us to acknowledge that maybe the way we've been doing things and or talking about things or the framework we've been upholding don't work for us anymore, right? And the us here is not just me or people in this room or Arabica farmers or Robusta farmers, it's everyone collectively. And so now we're here, and the Rise of Robusta is happening, and it will only continue to grow, and it's not to, again, replace Arabica, but to make room for what the possibility can be. Now going back a little bit, I wanted to share a really special story about IWCA to kind of bring us home. In 2019, on one of my sourcing trips, I was really fortunate enough to meet a group of women in the Vietnamese coffee industry who were working on improving the industry through specialty coffee farming, working with women farmers, providing education. This was through a 2019 trip in early 2019, February. And through these conversations, we started talking about our vision for the industry, Vietnamese coffee, Robusta coffee, and just how to improve farmers' livelihoods. After that initial meeting in February 2019, a few months later, this is Hung. She's one of the members of the IWCA Vietnam chapter. After this initial meeting in November 2019, Hung and also the founder of the chapter, Ngap An, started the International Women's Coffee Alliance Vietnam chapter, which we are a proud inaugural member of. And through our work with IWCA Vietnam chapter, through our membership fees, we provide workshops and education for women farmers. As a company, last year, Nguyen Coffee Supply has fundraised money through our community here and donated 1,000 coffee trees for women farmers. And then we've also gone so far as buying the green beans from the women farmers as who are part of the IWC network to encourage and support their work. This is the type of long-term partnership that we are truly excited about and that truly changed the industry. We partner, we listen, we learn, we educate, they apply, they iterate, and then we buy, we support, and then it continues going, right? This is the type of partnership and collaboration that breaks the cycle of poverty and economic exploitation that says you can only be in this part of the market. And now, if we do this together and learn together, we can break out of that and have a new path forward. So in wrapping, whether you work specifically in the Vietnamese coffee industry or specifically the Robusta industry, or even if you don't, I truly feel the main takeaway from my journey is not just about the bean, it's about how do we challenge the status quo and norms and perspectives and frameworks that don't serve us anymore, but more importantly, are not inclusive of every single person in the global coffee community. And as we think about what the future of coffee looks like and what the future of sustainable coffee looks like, ask ourselves if the words we speak, nasty, right? If the words we speak, if the perspectives we promote, if the frameworks we perpetuate and uphold, and the decisions that we make, are they truly inclusive of every single person, not just in the specialty coffee community today, but of every single person in the coffee community in general, so that we can all work towards making not just better coffee products, but a better coffee future where all people and all communities are included, supported, and uplifted. Thank you very much.